Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Namo Aniruddhaya Hishikeshendiyatmane Namaha Paramahamsaya Purnaya Nibratatmane Swarga Pavarga Dwaraya Nityam Suchisade Namaha Namah Hiranyaviryaya Chaturhotraya Tantave. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, thank you very much for joining us. Today is the 1st of June, 2015, and we concluded the sharing on Sri Harinam Chintamani in the previous session, which was on Thursday. And today's session, we are beginning a new topic, and there's a very special topic. And it's a very special topic because, it goes into great details in being able to offer us milestones in the process of devotional service. One has to be very enthused when they take on any objective. In other words, in normal material phenomenon, when we observe someone experiencing very good results, we have a tendency to develop desires to experience the same. So when we see someone graduating from, let us say, Harvard or Yale or Stanford, and then they take on, employment with a large salary, they take on employment in top-notch firms, we become enthused, or at least some become very enthused in wanting to pursue such a goal. They start thinking that we should study very hard, we should graduate with higher grades, and we should be able to enter into Harvard. Now, to enter into Harvard, one needs to be able to study those who have already graduated. We have to be able to study what it takes to enter into Harvard and graduate from Harvard. And we also have to study our own propensity and our capacity to see if we are able to do the same. But the fundamental quality of motivation is by observing success. In other words, there has to be some kind of indication of success. There has to be some kind of motivation for one to be able to move from one level to the other, and that is true even with spiritual objectives. So when Krishna says in 18.65 and also in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Manmanabo Madbhakto. He practically says, always think of me, render service unto me, right? Worship me, and so on and so forth. The word always think of me is quite overwhelming. And the reason it is overwhelming is because when we do reflect our day-to-day activities, it becomes almost impossible for us to conceive of a situation where we could always think of him. It becomes very difficult. And when such a goal is being experienced, or rather it's being explained in the primary text, which is Bhagavad Gita for us, that's where we begin. All forms of reading and understanding Krishna has to start with the Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita gives us guidelines on how to approach Krishna. One cannot approach Krishna directly unless one is able to understand the Bhagavad Gita. So it is required that we understand Bhagavad Gita, we take cues from the Bhagavad Gita, and then we approach Krishna in other shastras, through other means. So the Bhagavad Gita channelizes our effort by giving us a lot of support in terms of shastric evidence and direction. So when Krishna says that you have to always think of me and this is the goal of life, the goal becomes almost insurmountable. In other words, it's a goal which is pretty awesome by its very nature. And then one also gets to reflect on where we are today, and we start thinking that such a goal is indeed not reachable. It's not something which is even tenable. We may not be able to reach it. We don't belong in that category. Or rather, we may not find ourselves being enthused of always being able to think of Krishna. Because we are engaging in sadhana bhakti. Sadhana, by its very nature, is to be forced by the spiritual master, is to be forced by the authority for us to be able to take on a certain practice. You see? Not every one of us jumps out of bed at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning wanting to chant the holy names. Some days it happens and some days it doesn't. Some days it's a chore, it has to be completed. Some days the deities have to be worshipped. Some days we start thinking, why did I take this up? Right? And it's all a part of how deeply we become engrossed in material desires and with material energy. Because the extent to which we become engrossed, or rather connected to material energy, to that extent, the goal and the experience of Krishna consciousness becomes like sour grapes. So the point we are trying to make here is that without tangible milestones, without a description of milestones, one cannot make progress. One has to be able to calibrate themselves. It's like an athlete. An athlete has to time themselves. You see, they use stopwatches. You know, we may not use stopwatches unless you're cooking and you want to kind of moderate, how long things should be cooked and so on and so forth. We don't use stopwatches. Athletes use stopwatches. They got to find out, whether this particular lap was better than the previous lap when they were running around and, trying to accomplish a 100-meter dash. They have to find out if they were able to jump further or shorter, whatever. The point that you're trying to make here is that they have to calibrate themselves constantly and they have to be able to make improvement. And then they also calibrate themselves by saying that this year I will win the, maybe the trophy which is local, the local township trophy in my sport. The subsequent year I will participate in state level events. The year after that I will try for the national event. And then the year after that I probably should shoot for the Olympics. So if there's a 5-year goal of participating in the Olympics, it has to start somewhere by setting some kind of a milestone and being able to achieve it, calibrate it, keep improving till you reach the point of being able to participate in a global event. Okay? So in such a situation, when you start hearing from Krishna that the goal and the supreme instruction, the most confidential instruction is to always think of him, that seems awesome. And as a consequence, we need to be able to break it down for us to be able to understand as to how that's even possible. We also need to understand what one can experience at a certain level. We also need to understand what is stopping one from moving from one level to the other. We also need to be able to understand what lies beyond. If we do make an attempt, a very sincere attempt, what lies beyond? You see, without that particular knowledge, practicing spiritual life also becomes a little bit confusing. In other words, we really do not know where we are going, right? It's like a ship without a rudder. We're doing something wonderful, but then we don't know why we are doing it. We don't know what the milestones are. We don't know what to expect. We don't know what to aspire for, because it's all a matter of desiring. It's all a matter of being able to desire to do the right thing and not to do the wrong things, so that we may be able to experience a certain milestone in Krishna consciousness. The beauty about Krishna consciousness is that it is a scientific process. What do I mean by scientific? It is a scientific process because immaterial of who takes it up, if it has been given by a bona fide parampara, if the process has been received through a bona fide agent of Krishna, then such a process, if it is followed to the letter as given by the parampara, then one is able to experience the different milestones when the time comes. One is able to calibrate themselves. One is also able to see what we are missing. One is able to see where we are going wrong. One is able to avoid or move away from certain mistakes and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's measurable. These goals are very measurable. It's perceptible, and there's great descriptions given in the Shastra. Okay, now Madhurya Kadambini is actually a very short essay. There were 3 books written by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Today's session, I'm going to give an introduction. I'm going to focus a lot on understanding his mood, the author's mood, because it's very, very important for us to approach Shastra after understanding the intention and the quality and the elevated personality that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was. Then we will be able to better appreciate whatever he has written. There were 3 different essays, short essays. One was the Madhurya Kadambini, and then the other was Bhagavatamrita Kana, the second one, and the third one was um, Raghavatma Chandrika. These are three different books, and these are three different essays which Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur authored, and these were commentaries on the realizations of Srila Rupa Goswami and our other acharyas. But these are short essays, but they were so succinct and they were so, beautifully put, lucid, clear in terms of explaining what Krishna consciousness is and how one can move forward, that this in itself has become an elaborate, study. Okay, just like the dialogue between Srila Haridas Thakur and Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Harinam Chintamani, gave us so much insight into where we are failing. It gave us so much insight into how we could watch out for pitfalls. It also gave us, so much insight so that we could look forward to be able to improve and then, kind of watch out for everything. Now, Madhurya Kadambini is going to go very deep into the stages of bhakti. Madhurya Kadambini is going to go all the way from the giving of faith right up to Sri, Krishna Prema Bhakti. It goes all the way from one level to the highest level. And this, in fact, is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. This, in fact, is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is written by Srila Rupa Goswami. And he had written, these are two verses, sets of verses. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote a commentary, an essay on those verses, explaining the stages of bhakti. And that became Sri Madhurya Kadambini. But it's very exciting because it gives us very good information on the different milestones. It also tells us very clearly as to what one can experience, if they were to be sincere. It also tells us there's a lot of information on the process of being able to remove blocks. Okay, so we're going to take this up and we're going to go probably in the 1st of June, I would presume right through probably mid-August or early August. I think based on the material, and if I believe that we need to share more on certain topics, I will. And in certain topics, if I believe that the audience may not benefit fully if we spend too much time in it, then I might curtail such topics and summarize them as opposed to going in great detail. But what I would do is that I plan to conclude this by mid-August. That is the objective, maximum by mid-August. So it's a 2.5 month. We will have the same set of two sessions a week course, and then we would proceed, and there will be no changes to the timing. There's only one improvement, or rather change, which I wanted to implement, and then I had introduced it in the previous discussions that we had. I do want to create a Google event circle, I guess, a Google circle, where I could put people who are a part of this class, or rather people who want to be a part of that circle, study group, so on and so forth. If you could join, Sandhini, which is this page, I guess. If you could go to Google and then log in with your Google ID, and then if you're accessing this particular broadcast through Google, then you would have the ability to join the Sandhini page and become a part of a circle. I would then form that circle and I would introduce that as a part of everyday session. What that would do is that it would allow you to participate, probably in a more interactive fashion. We will first experiment to see if it works. Otherwise, we'll just revert to this old pattern. Okay. Some of you wrote to me. I do have your emails. But what I'm requesting you to do is to go to the Sandhini page and just subscribe to it and become a member of the Sandhini page in Google. Okay. You are accessing it now through the broadcast is coming through. One more request that I did have was it would save me a little trouble. I'm really grateful to all of you for coming and joining me every week and being able to share, Shastra and all the interesting questions that you have. What I would truly appreciate is that if you could take the effort to join the class by 8:25 or, just 5 minutes before, because every week I have to sit and do some editing just to make sure that I take out all the empty tape in the beginning. Sometimes YouTube doesn't allow me to, and it becomes a problem because people think that the class, is missing because, the first 4 minutes, 5 minutes, there's just blank. I could put a filler, but it's all work. It's all more work for me. So I'm just making a request. If it's possible, and if you are joining me at 8:30 or 8:35, please make it to 8:28. I'll be grateful. Okay, so let's get started. And the first thing that I want to do before we begin is I just want to give you a little overview. I'm going to show you a couple of things. One is that I'm using this book. This is the Reflections. It's an inverted image because of the camera. It's called Reflections, and it's authored by Sri Srimad Bhakti Tirtha Maharaja, my spiritual master. I'm using this commentary for Madhurya Kadambini. I'm also using a general translation which was made by His Grace Sarva Bhavana Das. I think he was a Prabhupada disciple back in the early 80s. So if you want to get that online, that you can get as well. I'm not sure where it's available, but you can try. Search for it, you will get it. Okay, and these are two books. If you want to buy this, it's available on btswami.com. Okay, before we get started, I just wanted to basically, give you the structure of this whole session, structure of how it's going to proceed. What can we look forward to, kind of? So the first shower of nectar, we basically go into the cause of bhakti, right? And then the second, we focus on faith. Third, we start understanding karma. We go very deep into karma in this book, practically. We go into different types of karma, what constitutes good and what constitutes bad and how it affects us and so on and so forth. And then we start talking about different offenses. And practically these offenses would touch upon topics that we spoke of during Harinam Chintamani, but this would be with the angle of a milestone because we're going to be talking about Anartha Nivritti. So the stages that we will be going into are being defined by Srila Rupa Goswami. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, you can find this verse, Madhya Leela 23:14 and 15. Adau Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sango Tata Bhajana Kriya Tato Anartha Nivritti Syat Tato Nishta Ruchi Tata Atashaktis Tato Bhavas Tataha Prema Buddhanchati Sadhakanamayam Premnaha Pradurbhave Bhavat Kramaha. Okay, the translation: in the beginning, there must be faith. Then one becomes interested in associating with pure devotees. Thereafter, one is initiated by the spiritual master and executes the regulative principles under his orders. Thus, one is freed from all unwanted habits and becomes firmly fixed in devotional service. Therefore, one develops taste and attachment. This is the way of sadhana bhakti. The execution of devotional service according to regulative principles. Gradually, emotions intensify, and finally, there's an awakening of love. This is the gradual development of love of Godhead for the devotee interested in Krishna consciousness. This is Srila Prabhupada's translation. Now, what we will be doing is that we will be understanding this Adau Shraddha. We'll be talking about Shraddha very deeply. We will be talking about Sadhu Sangha, which is practically coming in touch with an elevated soul. We would also be talking about Bhajana Kriya. Then we'll be talking about Anartha Nivritti, where we would be spending a maximum amount of time understanding different anarthas which block us. In Harinam Chintamani, we mentioned Anartha Nivritti, or rather we spoke of anarthas. Here we will be delineating and we will be taking it apart. And then we would also be going into what constitutes Nishta, what is being fixed. What is the view of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and our other acharyas when we talk about fixed devotional service? What is Nishta? Then we will talk about taste, Ruchi. What is Ruchi? And then we will also talk about Ashakti, which is attachment. And then finally, there are descriptions of Bhava and then Prema. So we'll be going through these stages and spending time as required and based on your questions, okay? Because that would give me a clear idea as to where more help is required. And then I would probably be spending time. So it'll be a little fluid in terms of schedules and which chapter would be taken up or rather how much time we're going to be spending in a session. But in all cases, I would probably be concluding by early August. Now, before we go further, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, we come in touch with him every day in the morning. When we chant the Samsara Dava prayers, that's authored by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, right? There are many other beautiful prayers that we use quite often that are authored by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. The historical account is that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur he comes in the line of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. His spiritual master was fourth in descent from Srila Narottam Das Thakur. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is in the line of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. And historically, it was a very, very complex time for Gaudiya Vaishnavas when Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur manifested his pastimes on the planet. Very complex time. It was the time of Aurangzeb, the Mughal emperor in Delhi. He was ruling, most of India, wherever the Mughal rule was. And practically all forms of faith were assaulted. Temples were destroyed, right? Sadhus, they were actually killed. Many of them were, fled out of fear. Deities were lost. They were desecrated. Many of them were broken. And, many women were polluted in a bid to convert. So it was an extraordinarily challenging time in Vraja, in Vrindavan, and in many other parts of India for faith to sustain itself. It's a very big challenge. And everybody began dispersing. In other words, the Sangha was not a concentrated Sangha at that point in time. So that was the time when Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur manifested his pastimes. In other words, he was the most prominent Acharya during that challenging time. And this was much after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left the planet, or rather he had ended his manifested pastimes in Jagannath Puri. Srila Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, Gopala Bhatta Goswami, and Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, all of them had also departed. Srila Jiva Goswami had departed. Srinivas Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Prabhu, they had departed. Krishnadas Kaviraj Prabhu had departed. So practically, all these stalwarts of Mahaprabhu's time had already left when Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur appeared. And he appeared in Bengal. And his initiation was with, there are two different accounts. I just want to say it was in the line of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur showed extraordinary scholarship right from his childhood. He was exemplary. Even when he was a student, he defeated very exalted, accomplished Pandits. So he displayed scholarship right from the beginning. And he was also very inclined towards renouncing. So he showed great signs of wanting to renounce, and his family tried to keep him back. So they married him at a very young age. And then it is said that on the advice of his guru, to follow the orders, he came back to spend time with his wife. But he spent the entire night talking about Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the morning, he went back to his guru and never came back after that. The guru decided that, his heart was not in anything material, and he had to be engaged in the service of Krishna. And the guru said, okay, you can renounce. And that's how the renouncing happened. He then began his bhajan. His bhajan used to be on the banks of Sri Radhakund, where he used to spend time around and in the Bhajan Kutir, which was established by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And he began an extraordinarily deep study of all the scriptures that were left behind by the Goswamis. Now, you have to remember that we are very fortunate because of our fallen condition. It is said that when someone is fallen, then more mercy is provided. We are fortunate that we can go with anyone with a connection with on internet these days. They can go and access a copy of scripture, confidential scripture. It's easily available if you do a proper search. During the time of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there was no such thing as a printing press. Everything was handwritten. So very confidential texts, realizations, so on and so forth, were available with very serious practitioners who had the shraddha and the appreciation for such treasures, and they used to guard it and used to live according to it and also preach based on those scriptures. So this was a time when he spent time in Sri Radhakund, very deeply immersed in all the writings of our acharyas, of the parampara. Now at that point in time, you see, we access Srimad Bhagavatam so easily. Every one of us probably has a copy or set of Srimad Bhagavatam. But in those days, Srimad Bhagavatam was written. Since it was handwritten, it was very rare. And authentic translations and authentic verses were so rare that it was very difficult for anyone to possess it unless they came in touch with authentic sources. In other words, there had to be a gurukul so that everybody could learn from a guru setting. So at that time, his guru requested Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur to begin the rendering of Srimad Bhagavatam. He said, write a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam. Why am I mentioning this? Because our Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, he has drawn all his commentaries in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam from the writings of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So, the copies that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote at the time, he translated the Srimad Bhagavatam, wrote commentaries in Bengali. And those commentaries are the ones that became the source of inspiration for our Srila Prabhupada, our parampara, and he was able to translate. And so there's a tremendous amount of contribution in our day-to-day life from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Now I want to share a few things which just to help put things in perspective. When he began writing the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that the seasons used to remain constantly favorable exactly in the spot where he used to sit and write. So if he were to write the Srimad Bhagavatam, if it were to rain, torrential rain and flooding used to happen everywhere, his place of worship and where the scriptures were kept and he used to translate used to remain completely dry, undisturbed. Very extraordinary. He had such power and potency and seriousness that the material elements used to change their order of functioning to facilitate his service. That was his power, not an ordinary level of power. His shraddha was such of wanting to follow the orders of a spiritual master that he used to have an effect on material energy. Material energy used to change to provide, a conducive environment. That was one incident. Now, the other incident was he authored a book on mantras, Mantra Deepika, and in that he spoke of the Kama Gayatri. And when he spoke of the Kama Gayatri, he was actually stuck because Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, in his purport, explains, and this is based on Lord Chaitanya's instructions, no less, that the Kama Gayatri is 24 and a half syllables. Sanskrit has half syllables. It has visargas. It has both the full and the half syllables. Unlike other languages, you can have a half syllable, which you have to account for while pronouncing mantras. So his reading and understanding was that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has written that there are 24 and a half syllables in the Kama Gayatri. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his realizations and count and so on and so forth, he found 25. So he was completely perplexed because he was such a scholar and at the same time extraordinarily humble that he was feeling quite distraught that he was not able to fully comprehend how it was 24 and a half. While he was spending time, he also realized that this was so important because the Kama Gayatri is the most important of all Gayatris. It is the personification of Srimati Radharani, that he immediately felt that this topic and this whole function was so serious that he should not eat, he should not, drink or do anything. He will just fast on to death till he gets answers. That was his seriousness. Seeing his condition, Srimati Radharani herself appears and starts explaining to him that Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was right. It is 24 and a half syllables. And she gives him the entire purport of the Kama Gayatri, which is her own personification. Kama Gayatri is considered to be Srimati Radharani's personification. So this particular personality was so powerful that he was able to draw mercy where Srimati Radharani herself appears to give him guidance. The other incident, which was also equally powerful, was when he received this very special deity, Gokulananda. His deity was Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda. You find that his samadhi is in Radha Gokulananda Mandir in Vrindavan. Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda was actually being worshipped by a brahmachari, a very serious brahmachari, who was rendering extraordinary service to Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda. The deity appeared in the dream of the brahmachari who was worshipping and instructed the brahmachari that take us and give us to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur so that we want to be worshipped by him. And the brahmachari, being very dedicated and sincere, he did not hesitate, even though he was extraordinarily attached. He simply took the deities and went to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur saying that they are requesting that you worship them. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, on the other hand, knew that the brahmachari was very sincere and he didn't want the brahmachari to lose this service. So he refused. So again, the deities appeared one more night, instructing the brahmachari to go and give them, so that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur could begin service. And at that time, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur himself received instructions from the deities that we want to come into your service. That is how Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda came to his possession. He began worshipping them. Even before that, Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to worship a Govardhan Shila. And he used to worship it, with such very, very deep attachment. Mahaprabhu used to cry. He used to practically, have the Govardhan Shila with him all times. He handed the Govardhan Shila to Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. He was so affectionate to Raghunath Das Goswami. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami was quite young and he came there. So he was given the Govardhan Shila by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. And then Swarup Damodar Goswami instructed Raghunath Das Goswami on how to worship. That particular Govardhan Shila was then passed on from Raghunath Das Goswami to Krishnaraj Kaviraj Goswami, and then it went to Krishna Priya Thakurani, and then finally it came to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So he receives the Govardhan Shila because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructs him to begin worship. So he instructs him. So he receives direct instructions from Mahaprabhu, receives benedictions from Srimati Radharani herself, and then deities want to come. So this is a very, very special personality altogether with all kinds of wonderful manifestations. And he was put on the planet at a time when the Gaudiya Vaishnava faith was under attack. It was under attack because of Aurangzeb, the political condition, where everybody who was theistic was under attack. It was under attack also because devotees were completely dispersed. The center of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which was Vraja, all the temples were damaged. The deities were dispersed. The deities were taken from one place to the other. We had Radha Govindji being taken to Rajasthan, Jaipur. So at that point in time, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's appearance was very, very critical because you had someone very potent come in so that he could restore Gaudiya Vaishnavism and put Gaudiya Vaishnavism again back on track. Okay, so this was a very, very stellar, it was a very powerful service that was rendered by him. And at that time, what had happened was that Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Vaishnava Siddhanta presented by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was under attack by some other faiths. When I say some other faiths, within the Vaishnava Sampradayas, there was a lot of differences. There were a lot of differences. And they began questioning the authenticity of the teachings which were given by Mahaprabhu. The whole Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as presented by Mahaprabhu, was being challenged. So to combat this, they needed someone. And at that time, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was 70 years of age. He was quite advanced in age, like our Prabhupada. You know, Prabhupada came to America, he was 70. So he was 70 and he was quite infirm. And at that time, he began praying to the divine couple, wanting help, saying, you know, they need to send me help. They need to send me someone who is a pandita, you know, who can combat this. Someone who comes from a bona fide Vaishnava Sampradaya. So at that time, Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan, right, he was a part of the Madhva Sampradaya. And the Madhva Sampradaya, the difficulty was that they don't accept Srimati Radharani because the scriptures don't mention the name of Srimati Radharani fully. So they don't accept her. And as a consequence, they were demanding all kinds of proofs. And how do you bring in someone who can basically re-establish Gaudiya Vaishnavism and so on? So at that time, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's mentor goes to Karnataka, where Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan was staying, and he preaches to him. And the personalities those days were very sincere. So if they ever found that someone could present a philosophy which was superior and it had Shastric power, in other words, it was connected to Shastra, there was Praman, they accepted the Shastra and undertook that particular lineage from that moment. They accepted defeat and surrender, and they accepted the theology which was given to them. So the personality who went and met, you know, Vidyabhushan, Baladev Vidyabhushan, was able to convince him of the supremacy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and he became a Gaudiya Vaishnava at that point in time. And he was a very powerful Pandit, very powerful Pandit. He was extraordinarily powerful in being able to deal with the other different arguments that were coming forth. And then they all went and they found that the entire Gaudiya Vaishnava faith was being challenged because in Rajasthan, in Jaipur, and in Jaipur it was being challenged by the king. The king himself was quite weak in terms of, he was not a Shastrika. He was favorable, but he could not take on, you know, the different brahmanas and the mutts and so on and so forth, you know, because of fear of political repercussions. So the pundits in the court challenged Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, saying that you must produce a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. You see, Veda Anta is the conclusions of all the Vedas is given in the Vedanta Sutra. So the Vedas themselves deal with fruitive activity and other activities. The conclusions finally talk about reaching Krishna. So the Vedanta Sutras, every bona fide Sampradaya, the Sri Sampradaya, Madhva Sampradaya, even Shankara Sampradaya, they all have commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras. That is the whole basis for their existence. In other words, the entire parampara or the teachings of a specific lineage are dependent on the commentary for the Vedanta Sutras. And we did not have one in the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. The reason we did not have one, because we never felt the need for one, because we had Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all scriptures. It is a summum bonum. It has been written at the matured consciousness of Srila Vyasadeva. His despondency of wanting to write something super special brought him to the point of being able to deliver the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the highest. Nothing is beyond the conclusions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is the faith of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And as a consequence, during the time of Srila Rupa Goswami, during the time of Mahaprabhu, there was never a need for them to pursue a translation of the Vedanta Sutra, or rather a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra to establish the supremacy of our Siddhanta. But this was challenged. This was a challenge. This was a challenge posed due to political and due to other power struggles. And that was an unusual period in Gaudiya history. Very unusual, challenging time period. So at that point in time, Baladev Vidyabhushan, on the orders of Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he began praying to Govindaji, because it was Radha Govindaji who was presiding deities in Jaipur. And he began offering prayers to Sri Radha Govinda, saying that I'm helpless. How could I produce something which would, refute the arguments and also do so in a short period? It is said that he completed his entire work in 7 nights, in 1 week. And Sri Radha Govindaji heard themselves, Govinda gave him help. He spoke, and Baladev Vidyabhushan wrote the commentary. Baladev Vidyabhushan was a great Pandit, so he had complete knowledge of the sutras. But to write a tika, for them to be able to write conclusions, and for them to be able to present, a paper, and in a very short, compressed period of time, and to make it authentic, that was insurmountable. It is not an ordinary task. And it was Govinda himself who wrote. So that's why our commentary in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, our commentary on the conclusions of the Vedanta Sutras is called Govinda Bhashya. Because it is on that basis that we are also a bona fide line which is accepted. In other words, we are 100% bona fide even without it, because Mahaprabhu gave us the orders, and Bhagavatam supports our views, and we are all followers of Srimad Bhagavatam. No one talks about Vedanta Sutras much, do we? We are interested in pastimes. No one in our line wants to be a scholar. No one. If you want to be a scholar, it is not our line, because you don't want to be a scholar. We want to be devotees. We want bhakti. We don't want jnana. You see, this jnana makes one very proud. If you notice, normally offenses are committed by those who think that they know more than the opposite party. Okay? And this is all a new, this is because the approach in life is not devotion, it's jnana. So we are not jnanis. You see, we have no interest in trying to, struggle with, different aspects of Sanskrit and so on and so forth. We have no appreciation for that. Honestly, it shouldn't be. I'm not saying it is wrong. It is just that bhakti has nothing to do with this. Srila Prabhupada's entire rendering of the Srimad Bhagavatam, practically everything that Srila Prabhupada wrote, he wrote 60 volumes. No one can debate the fact of his knowledge and his contribution in completely revitalizing the planet for many, many years to come. No one can debate that. But his approach to writing the Srimad Bhagavatam, his approach to writing Srimad Bhagavad Gita, his approach to all the translations was not to establish himself as a scholar. He had no such objective. His approach was bhakti. So it is said that if you carefully read the Srimad Bhagavatam given by Srila Prabhupada, you will find that all the translations may not meet what you would call the Sanskrit scholars, penchant for rules and so on, but every translation can induce bhakti. That is what Srila Prabhupada did. He promised and he delivered bhakti. That was the whole objective. Okay? So the point we are trying to make here is that we really don't care, honestly. But the bona fidity of a certain line has to be established based on the peers. And those days, the peer pressure was, where is your commentary on the Vedanta Sutra? And we were able to provide such a Vedanta Sutra commentary because of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and his blessings on Baladev Vidyabhushan, who was a great scholar. So he had great potency. He was very young. And it was Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur who gave him mercy so that he could write. And Lord Govinda himself comes and dictates and makes it happen. Okay? So this is our Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in terms of his involvement and his overall scholarship and whatever he contributed. Okay? So this, I just wanted to give you a sense of whom you're dealing with. You're dealing with a special personality with very special realizations. We are completely dependent on his mercy, and we'll offer prayers to him, and we will begin in the next session. We'll discuss further on how we can traverse, the rest of our time on this planet, trying to make progress, tangible progress that is measurable, progress with knowledge, progress with a lot of anticipation. Okay, I'll stop here and I will see if I can take any questions, if you have any. Okay, I don't see any questions. I believe today's session was somewhat of a general session. I will meet you again on Thursday, and if possible, please join us a little earlier, 8:28, a couple of minutes before, so that I would be able to start and conclude on time. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.